Search for Common Ground is the largest and oldest peace building organization in the world, and we work in over 30 countries. And we have been doing this work to really help bring people together across difference to address all sorts of conflicts. And so for us at CGUSA, our main mission and goal is to work within the United States to address conflicts that we're facing in order for us to build an inclusive and unified America. And I am thrilled to be able to pass the mic over to Joe to tell you a little bit about the work that he does, and then we'll pass it to Maxine.
Thank you, Faith. Good afternoon, everyone, or maybe early evening to some of you. So Joe McMahon, based out of Texas, of the Austin area. The initiative that we work on, focus on here in Texas, the Resilient States Project, and we opened our doors or opened the project about a year and a half ago here in Texas, and then soon after expanded and opened an office about a month later in Pennsylvania. And the overall objective or work that we're trying to do here in Texas is to take as many preventative measures as we can to ensure political violence doesn't happen down the road, or do our best to decrease political violence down the road. And so the main focus and the main objective that we're working on now is really how to decrease the political temperature here in Texas. Luckily, we don't see a lot. If there's other Texans on the call, we don't see a lot of political violence. There are some harassments out there, threats out there to elected officials. Luckily, the numbers are fewer in Texas compared to some of the other states and to some of my good colleagues there in Pennsylvania. But it is a polarized environment. Bipartisanship is still there some. They're trying to hold on to it, but it's not near as bipartisan a spirit as it used to be. But just like in any other state across the U.S., the divisiveness continues to grow. The lack of civility continues to grow as well. And so what we do is try to take measures to address that. And so we not only try to convey our work and our messaging to elected officials, state and local, but also to the public, because we can't point our fingers just at elected officials, because many times the elected officials are responding to the constituents, right? And so much of our work and our messaging is geared towards the public as well. And so when we first started our office about a year and a half ago, we put together an advisory board just to kind of give you an idea of the consistency of the group. It consists of four different entities, mostly of business leaders, education leaders, veteran leaders, and faith leaders. And as we were putting this advisory board together, I try my best to find a good mix of folks from rural and urban areas, and also of multiple beliefs, right? With folks leaning to the right, to the left, some independents as well. But they do share one common thing, and they have seen the polarization increase, and they know it's not healthy for our state. And so that's, they definitely share that in our work moving forward. And so we have a lot of strong, reputable folks, community leaders that are part of this group that do have an impact. Their voice is definitely impactful. And so it's great working with all these folks and trying to address it. It's not going to happen overnight. But we are making some progress, which is good. So I'll stop there, Faith, and hand it over to you.
All right, Maxine, why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about yourself and the work that you're leading?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It's so wonderful to be here and with two fabulous, brilliant people alongside me. I'm Maxine Rich. I'm a program manager with Common Ground USA. I wear a few different hats. One of them is as our I manage two different projects essentially. One is with faith leaders, actually in Joe's home state in Texas, and the other is with higher education leaders. We work with two different constituencies within higher education. We're running an administrators boot camp. How do you support university and college administrators who are grappling with a lot of tensions right now? I'm sure you all have seen in the news a lot coming at them. And how can they manage the current tensions that are going on between students and faculty, between students, faculty, and administrators. A lot of coming at each other. How can they manage that in a way that's visionary and transformative, and protects students and faculty? Um, and we also work with student journalists, which is really fun. How can we lift up the voices of students who are able to tell those more complex, nuanced stories that they know exist on their campuses rather than the big culture war, us versus them narratives that can get spun up? um, how can we uplift those student journalists to basically take what the kind of work that Search for Common Ground has done around the world in terms of uplifting voices of peace, teaching journalists how to be what we call conflict sensitive in their reporting, and how do we bring that to college student journalists today? And we're doing that also in partnership with the Fulcrum, which is just a really fantastic bridge building publication. So shout out to them. And it's really, really fun work.
Thank you so much, Maxine. So, as you can see, our work takes many different shapes and forms, and that is really how our work works around the world. We look to the context that we're in, we have partners in local communities, and we find culturally relevant and appropriate ways to reach people and to work across different. So, one thing you might be thinking is, yeah, it sounds fine, well, and great, but things feel really hard and tense right now. And I don't know if I can work across different. Well, we believe that conflict is an opportunity and it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are good things that have emerged out of conflict and people coming together to solve some really hard problems together. Think about some of the campaigns that have happened and advocacy around making sure that people are wearing their seatbelts and also around drunk driving and people coming together across difference to address those things. Moms who came together and said, hey, we don't want this for our children. We want to find a solution. Let's work together and get something done. And they did it. And we've seen that time and time again, the power of being able to take action together and what can come from that. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of elements of this and how you can work through conflicts and also begin to see transformation happen together. So I'm going to start with you, Maxine. I'd love to know what are some of the conflicts that your work addresses? Or even what are some of the ways that we can transform conflict into a point of connection?
Yeah, thanks, Faith. That was said so beautifully. So I know often when we're in a crisis moment, it's really easy to zoom just in on the crisis. And when it feels also like we have so much crisis after crisis hitting us, it's really easy to get lost, and feel just overwhelmed. Um, our a lot of people react different ways to crisis and instability. Some of us overact, some of us underact. I can do both within the same day, depending on what the topic is. And how do we stay even keel? And something that I've been thinking about is really how do we paint a pathway from crisis to transformation? And I've been working on teaching this to some of the student journalists that we work with, in particular, because in the flashpoint moment, it's so easy to zoom the lens in just on that moment. Joe, I don't want to take your metaphor that you're going to use later, but it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's what gets the attention. And how do we expand that out in a way that is allows us to see what are the opportunities and possibilities for transformation? So the first place that I've been telling our student journalists to start is with yourself. How can I, first of all, build my own resilience? We're all peace building is a marathon, not a sprint. How am I taking care of myself? And one way to do that is to pick your one thing. We cannot possibly carry all of the water by ourselves. So, what is the one thing, or maybe two things, that are your particular passion that you want to focus on? And how are you really prioritizing your time around that? Um, And then how can I, as a person, model the kind of behavior that I want to see in the world, including being a non-anxious presence? How can I bring a degree of calm to the situation, knowing what my triggers are, stepping back when I need to? But I really do believe that calm is contagious, just as anxiety is contagious. How do I avoid amping up the, building up the ante, and really maintaining calm internally so that I can spread that out? So that's and starting with me. Then we expand out to the community. Some of you may have heard of the concept of spheres of concern, thinking about who is most directly affected, then who is outside a little bit less directly affected. How can we be supporting those who are most directly affected as best as possible? And really also thinking about when a crisis happens, who is being heard and who is being unheard and who is being flattened. I know as a Jewish person, it's been really frustrating to see the different ways that my community is flattened and painted in different ways with all of the controversies going around my community right now. And how can we, one of our colleagues, Will, often says that we want to be seen in 4D, but it's so easy to see others in 2D. And how do we make sure that we're making that everyone is able to see and be seen in their full humanity, and that we're supporting those who are most directly affected in our community? And then in this moment, how do we think about a path toward transformation? So we have me, we have my community, and then we have transformation. And there are two questions I ask myself in this moment. One, who is doing good work, who I can lift up in this moment? There's always going to be someone who is breaking bread, who is leading the charge to support those most affected by a crisis, who is trying to bridge divides across the most difficult of tensions. How do I not just focus on who is being the most divisive so that I'm amplifying them and doing their work for them, but also lifting up the leaders who I believe in and I support and I want to have a bigger platform? What am I reposting? What am I commenting on and sharing with my friends and family? And then also, what is possible in this moment because of this crisis? Our work, the work that Joe, Faith, and I all do, is in some part, we're drawn to it because of the kinds of crises that we're seeing in our community. And it brings a renewed focus, Faith, as you were saying, on what can we do positively to create a new way forward. Conflict and crisis in particular can be such a powerful inflection point to choose a new direction if we want it to be. One of the universities that we work with, that I will not name because I didn't clear it with them. But a few years ago, they had a really significant crisis over student housing. Really intense kind of protests and organizing by students. And coming out of that, they saw, okay, well, we need a more constructive way for student voices to be heard, because clearly there is a problem here that we need to address. And blocking offices in the administrative building is not the way that we want students to encourage students to go about this, because it's obstructive and it keeps us from actually doing the work to solve the problem. So providing instead regular listening sessions within the community so that students and administrators could be in relationship with each other, so that they have the trust, they have the opportunity for the administrators to explain, well, here are our constraints and here's what we're thinking about right now, and be really clear and honest and transparent in a way that builds trust. No one wants to feel like they're being talked down to or that someone's hiding the ball. And then students have an opportunity to share, well, here's where we're coming from and here's what we're experiencing. And because they started that process a few years ago, it laid the groundwork in increasingly polarized and increasingly tense times for students and administrators to have those relationships already so that they could have a more collaborative and constructive conversation. Now, as protests ramp up around a range of issues, um, that they're able to see themselves as a community with a shared goal of building a space where students and staff and administrators belong and are safe.
Thank you so much, Maxine. That was super insightful. And if you've been listening so far and you find yourself saying, oh my goodness, This is great. And I also want to ask some questions. There is a Q&A box available to you, and we would love to chat with you. We would love for this to be a conversation. So if you do have questions, please do drop them in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to address as many as we can. So please feel free to start loading up that Q&A box with questions. I want to talk to you, Joe. I want to talk a little bit more about the lack of civility we see in politics and the impact of that. Can you go into some thoughts you have there and some tools, tips, whatever you have that might be helpful?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Faith. Um, yeah, even those of you on the call that may not follow politics super closely, you know that it's gotten dirtier and dirtier, it seems like, over the years, right? And I can only speak for the state of Texas, and I've seen the decline as far as respect over the years. But with that being said, oftentimes we um, guilty assurance of the negative things, the lack of civility, right? The lack of respect. But at the end of the day, I also want to remind um, you and everyone I talk to that's, most elected officials do get along pretty well. I can't speak for Congress. I don't spend much time there, but for most houses and chambers across the state, House and Senate, excuse me, across the state, most of the folks do work fairly well together. Now, when it comes around campaign season, when it comes around time for interviews and a camera in front of them for interviews, the tone may change some, right? But the lack of civility has definitely increased. And I will say that the reason I'm optimistic about this work, just in the last year and a half since we've been visiting with different groups, whether it's individuals, whether it's large organizations, whether it's even elected officials, most folks are very much in agreement with what we're talking about. They don't like the state that we're in right now. They don't like the lack of civility in the conversations. And so that's all very good. The business community doesn't like it. It's not good for the state. It's not good for attracting commerce as well. And so one thing that we're doing here in Texas, still somewhat in the early stages of it, is we have a state compact on civility. And so we've been approaching different large statewide organizations to support the compact. And it's a no-brainer. If you were to read it, you say, why would you not want to support this, right? And the messaging is more about what my group, what my organization is going to stand for. And this is what we are going to do ourselves. It's not attacking or going after elected officials, but we hope they do see, the messages that we are working on. But I would say there is definitely a need and a desire across the state for politics to tone it down a bit. Now, are we optimistic about it or not? Going back to the comment earlier that Maxine mentioned about the squeaky wheel getting the grease. I'm sure many of us have seen times where we're like, my gosh, we know this person doesn't represent the majority of folks, right? And I don't know what the last stat is. It's 65% of Americans are here, full of common sense and pre-moderate, and they want what's best for their state. They want what's best for the country, right? And so we oftentimes have to remind people that if you don't like the extreme voices on both sides getting all the attention and having success, you have to speak up. Going back to what Maxine was talking about earlier, it does start with us, and it starts with you, whether it's your messaging to your family and friends, whether it's your online messaging, if you have a strong presence online. Um, and I've even noticed myself, I've tried to tone it down around my family when I start talking about stuff. And I'm sure my manager would be happy to hear that. And then even our members, when I talk to my members, one-on-one conversations, it's kind of like, those of you that are parents out there, you try to instill the right things in your kids and you don't know if it's working or not. And then later on you see, oh, wow, it's, I guess I did something pretty good. It's kind of like that we're working with our advisory board. You don't know for sure if we're having impact, but then one-on-one conversations, they share all these positive stories that they're having the same conversations with their network of friends or just, work-related friends about the work. And we have members that are posting things online that maybe would not have in the past, but about our messaging and return to civility and mutual respect. And they're receiving positive feedback from it as well. Even our members are are being impacted by others within our group that are completely opposite politically, completely in two different communities. Um, but they hear their struggles, they hear their stories, and they feel for them, right? And so now it's going to take a long time to reach all Texans or all Americans, right? But the work is making an impact slowly but surely. So, but yeah, it starts with us is one of the main messages that we always talk about as Maxine. And how do you take the silent majority and help them become a little more vocal? Because people are always talking about the importance of voting. Yes, that is important, but it's also to speak up for what's right. All right, and so that's what our members are trying to do as well. But you have to walk that fine line sometimes when our members are talking to elected officials, right? There's a balance there, but and I will say, and I'm sure many of you on the call know this as well. Many of these conversations, when you have them with elected officials, they're on the same page as you are, as we are. But then sometimes that tone changes a little bit, once they're in a different environment. So most people are striving for more goodness and more healthy conversations out there. So that's all good.
Thanks so much for that, Joe. And I think one of the things that I'm really taking away from what you're saying is how, even with the advisory board, it takes time to foster that connection and that community. This isn't just like instantaneous work. You've actually taken the time to get to know one another, to build that trust. So that way there is that shared vision, like you're saying, to like, hey, we believe in one another. We see the goodness in each other. We might have some points that we disagree on, but we have things we do agree on, and we want to work together. And like you said, stand up for what's right together and as a community. And I think that that's really powerful. I want to address something that oftentimes comes up whenever we start talking about the work that we do. People say to us, okay, like, I'm hearing you, this sounds great, but does common ground mean I have to give up my ideals, my values, all of these things? Like, what are you talking about? Is this just like, too like pie in the sky? And to that, I want to say it does take work to work together with people across difference. But what we aren't saying is to give up your values or to give up on the things that matter to you. We are saying, hey, let's find some things that you and I might have some common ground on that we want to make change in together. I didn't give up anything. You didn't give up anything. We just have some intersections. And one thing that I think is happening currently is the flattening of our identities. We are, there's just like you were saying, Maxine, basically like seeing each other in 2D and not 4D. And I think that that is something that oftentimes occurs, and it hinders our progress in working together and finding those places where, you know what, we have a shared interest point there. Let's take some action and see some movement in this direction together. And I think that it's really important because we know that if we want to have a healthy future and vision together, it's one where we can be a community that desires to address everyone's needs, their concerns, and their values. And that is the part that's beautiful about community and seeing each other, because it means that we want to make space and room to hold those spaces together, because at our core, we believe in each other's shared humanity and the power of that. Maxine, I want to talk to you a little bit about community, um and then I want to go to Joe to follow up on that. Can you talk a little bit about how you see strong community? What does that look like? What does it look like in action?
Gosh, Faith, that was um so beautiful. I know it's so hard because it's so human But when we see each other as the problem, we're not able to actually fix the problem. When we're facing off at each other instead of facing shoulder to shoulder at the problem, we're just we're spinning. We're not really getting anywhere. Um, and there is so much that we can do together. Something I want to say for building community is we're Faith, I know you talk a lot about the crisis and epidemic of loneliness, and I think that's so important to 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 acknowledge. And as part of that, we're also experiencing a real crisis of belonging as a society. Some people are feeling like they used to belong, and they're seeing themselves lose their sense of belonging. Oh, I used to really fit in. Although belonging is more than fitting in, it's your ability to show up as your authentic self, um, which we all need. We've all been that kid in middle school who changes themselves to fit in. And even if you have friends, that's not like satisfying the hunger you have in your soul for real connection. Um, so some of us feel like we're losing our sense of belonging, and a lot of us feel like we never really belonged in the first place. But overall, across the country, and I want to shout out our friends who developed the Belonging Barometer, who've done some fantastic research on this. The ways that so many Americans are feeling like there's no real place where they feel a sense of belonging. And the number one thing that's so exciting is we all have the power to build belonging within our communities with each other. And the number one way, and I know this is a tough one, but listening to each other, it's like so basic and like, okay, but it's fundamental, particularly if you want to create a change. People won't hear you until they feel heard. And unless you're taking the time to really deeply listen, and not just it's active listening, not just listening to respond, but truly taking in what they're trying to say. It's a beautiful thing because not only does it create a space for them to drop their guard and perhaps change their own perspective, but it also creates a space for me to change my own perspective and learn something new and understand where they're coming from. Because I can only create change so well as I understand someone else. Um, and I'm sort of going off from where your question was, but I just so many of us are we forget when we're doing I'm DC's my hometown, and we like wear our fancy suits, and we're very fancy formal people, but at the end of the day, I think something we're seeing across the country is we're actually just humans. We're humans with emotional needs that we have to meet. And we have, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to meet our basic human need for safety and belonging. And if we're not able to meet that for each other, then we're not really going to be able to progress toward solving our shared problems, which we have so many in front of us.
That's so great. And so, Joe, I also want to share with you a question from the chat as you're also thinking about some pieces of the question that you're going to answer about community and why it's important. But this question says, is there a particular technique for finding a common issue that will help an organization or a church focus? Essentially, is there a way you've found that's a way that you can help rally people around a shared issue? Feel free to chat about community. And as you talk, if you have thoughts you want to add to that question, feel free. And I'll also open up the space for you later to Maxine to chime in if you have thoughts too.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, and thanks for the question too. Yeah, as far as instead of saying community for the focus that we have here in Texas, I say, how do you build the spirit of bipartisanship, right? How do you bring more civility back to our environment and such? And there's a few things that we are working on that have had some impact on that. First, I always have to remind myself and my colleague on a daily basis, those of you that are on this call, we kind of work in this space more than likely. It's part of our daily conversations. There are millions of people that do not, and they may not see what we see or think what's going on that we think, right? They're trying to get their kids to school. They may have a job, two jobs. They're trying to, make ends meet. And we are all guilty of being in our bubble, right? So if you stay in your bubble, everything's fine. Then come election season, then you're like, oh my gosh, our country's about to just implode, right? And so so I oftentimes have to remind myself of that when we're doing this work in our messaging, that it may not resonate with everyone because they might not be impacted right then and there in what we're trying to do. But one local event that we've been doing last few months, about last 6 months, is called Together We Dine. It's a local dining event that we've had 4 markets last year, and we're going to do 10 this year. And we've partnered with a great organization out of Dallas called Project Unity. And basically, how the dinner works is everyone knows the value and the importance of breaking bread and having conversations over dinner, right, or lunch. And so what we do is we invite anywhere between 40 to 70 community leaders to come together. Ideally, it's a good mix of right-leaning, left-leaning folks. You don't always have control over that, but that's the ideal situation. And have small group conversations over some of the hot divided topics. Small group, 5 to 8 people at each table. We have a trained facilitator at each table as well. And the overall objective of that, if it's a smaller community, some of those folks may know each other. If it's in Dallas, a lot of those folks are not going to know each other, right? So, but the overall objective is to get a better understanding of how someone feels the way they do about a topic that may be totally opposite of yours, right? I think Maxine mentioned it earlier. We're not out there trying to convince people that I'm right, you're wrong, right? But we hope that whatever that divided topic is, whatever that polarized topic is, the end goal is for that person to walk away and have a better understanding of that. I may not believe the same way you do. I may not even agree with you, but I respect your opinion, and hopefully that will lead to less hate, less divisive, less polarization down the road, right? And I think Maxine, you mentioned it earlier, one of the biggest issues in our country, and I've heard this from multiple people starting this project a year and a half ago, is that people are not talking. People are not coming together, especially on opposite ends of beliefs. And so luckily events like this provides that venue, at least to have the conversation. Now you're going to change everything overnight with 30 or 50 people at a time? No. But it does have an impact. And that messaging, does continue it does have a domino effect on people. And then also, I mentioned earlier the civility compact for the state. Maybe that's something that you could consider on a local level for your city council, promote them to do it as well. And so that those are, just a couple of examples of small things we're trying to do to bring some bridge the divides a little bit out there. As far as a question earlier, as far as finding a common topic to bring people together, if you find an initiative that's a shared value, that's a great opportunity. There's many organizations, as we probably all know, that work on key issues, whether it's transportation, education, just infrastructure issues. And it's not an R or D issue, right? It's a state issue or a local issue, whatever. But find that issue that it's beneficial to the community, and it's not looked at from a conservative or a liberal standpoint. And so I don't know if I'm really answering the question out there, but there is a project or initiative that's going to better that community. What a great opportunity to bring a wide variety of political spectrums together to accomplish it.
Thanks so much, Joe. That's such a great answer. And I think what I loved about it, it's really practical and tangible and gives people ideas on ways that they can also act within their community. One of the ways that we do that here at Search is through the common ground approach. So, to the person asking the question, you're saying, "What's your technique? How do you do it?" We deploy the common ground approach, and I'm actually going to pass to Maxine to talk a little bit about the common ground approach, but then also can you maybe even use some of the work going on with university students to, or even the work you're doing in Texas with faith communities to kind of pull out those through lines and give an example of the way you're using that in your work to give them just a little bit more in terms of ideas on what they can do to find a common issue.
Yeah, so one of my favorite tools is one of our colleagues, he talks about the question why as a screwdriver. Because when we're starting at, well, I believe X and I believe Y, it's really hard then to find the common ground. But when we get below that, well, why do you believe that? And then maybe even a level lower, well, why do you believe that? You get to a base of some shared value, some common ground. And again, it's not faith, as you brought up, it's not compromise. It's something that you have in common that you want to achieve. And when you hit that, so like, I'm not, I can't remember my geology lesson. So whatever that base rock layer is called, when you hit that, it then creates a space to build back on top of. Um, the best example we like to give is from our colleagues in Kenya, who were able to bring together a group of night fishermen and police officers around the height of the Kenyan government's efforts to curb violence and organizing by Al-Shabaab, the terrorist organization. They decided to ban night fishing because they realized that Al-Shabaab was using the very common traditional practice of night fishing to transport weapons and fighters at night in small fishing boats. And so they decided, you know what, we just have to put the kibosh on this practice to secure the safety of our area. The problem for the night fishermen is this is their livelihood, and that's not going to work. But through a process of facilitated dialogue, the night fishermen and the police officers were able to come together, repeatedly build trust, ask those questions of why, and build back up to an entirely new position that was not yes, night fishing, no night fishing, but was just having an ID card, which feels so obvious. But the brilliance of it is no one could have thought about it if they just stayed stuck in their positions. Um, so that question of why as a screwdriver and it's so much easier said than done, but having the openness, it's on a personal level, the openness to be wrong, the openness to change your mind, and to, for the purpose of the greater good of finding solutions to shared problems is just so, those are such nice, lofty words, but the emotional inner work that it takes, I just really, I Joe's said it well. I'm sure people on the call are also people who are also engaged with us in this kind of work. And so you've been in these conversations. Um, so that's what I would say top line for what is the common ground approach. It's breaking out of our really entrenched positions to get to the underlying interests and needs that allow us to then pull together as a community. Um, I can't now, I'm losing the thread of the question, so I hope that answered it,
Yeah.
actually.
No, that was great. It was a really great thread. And I think a super amazing example. I actually love that example because I think, like you said, it's a solution that people probably wouldn't have thought of if they hadn't taken the time to actually listen to each other. And I think that's one of the important things that we need in our communities today. Right now, we actually are seeing people are finding themselves to be lonelier than ever right now. And I think that, that's something that we're grappling with. People are finding themselves more isolated, not being in community. Maybe they're spending more time online, but not actually getting out of those online silos because there are silos online, and the algorithm is going to feed you things you like and things you want to see, and maybe even negative messages that aren't positive about people who are different from you. And you can begin to not only in your real life physical silo, but your online silo, continue to find yourself further and further isolated from community, which actually doesn't help us connect and come together in the way that we should. And so some of the things that we do and deploy in our programming is finding ways to move from dialogue to action. But a part of dialogue and building community is also about building trust. And so we do have to lay out ground rules, and everyone has different ground rules that they use for hosting the discussion. Some people, like to use a talking stick. I know I saw a brief question about that, but it's not in front of me. So, but which is essentially a way to say, okay, whoever has the talking stick, we're actually going to pay attention and listen to what they have to say. Some people have actually used different. I know people who, like, one person used a little elephant and they would like pass it around to the group, and whoever was holding it, people were going to listen. And so that's a way of ensuring that everyone in the group also gets a voice. But ground rules are helpful too. So I want to talk to you, Joe, ask you a question. When people are starting to build community with people who hold different beliefs and values, um, how can people begin to find that common ground and build that community from scratch? You've talked about your network. I assume some of those people didn't know each other. And, how did you go about cultivating a space and an environment that was welcoming and disarming for people to feel comfortable to come together with people across difference?
Well, I locked the door first so they couldn't leave, and then I'm joking. Yeah, that most people did not know each other. So I would say, if you're trying to do this on a local level or in your state, is, find what brings you together. Where's that local pride? I'm fortunate that I live in a state where there's a lot of pride. I'm sure you have a lot of pride in your local community. I'm sure you have pride in your state out there as well. Um, and so I think if you set that as the priority, everything else kind of falls into place, right? So that's what made it a little easier. And then you find what they all have in common, the pride, and then the increased polarization, the increased rhetoric, the divisiveness. Everybody was on the same page on that as well, right? Tired of it, sick of it. Most Americans are tired of it and sick of it. And so that's what brought them together. And then just the idea of possibly having an impact. Oftentimes say we're kind of somewhat building this plan as we're flying it, because we're more into the preventative work, right now, and trying to decrease the temperature. But it was really it's interesting now because many of those folks have their own personal relationships with each other, as far as amongst the advisory board. And one of the biggest compliments also as we continue this work and continue the conversation is referrals to others. Have you talked to so-and-so about this work? Have you talked to so-and-so? So you're on the right track when things like that start happening automatically without you asking about it. But then even on a community level, there's a lot of things that all of you can do. There's a document, I don't know if we can trade it or share it in here, the top 50 things that our CEO, Neelan Parker, had created. It's 50 things. We don't expect you to be able to do all of them, but at least kind of gives you an idea, some different ideas out there that you can tackle yourselves. And I will say generally, the earlier I mentioned the Together We Dine event that we have. Um, at the end of each one of those, we try to end it with 4 or 5 call to actions that hopefully people will think about. A couple of those I've already mentioned to you. One, it does start with you and your conversation, right? Two, speak up, whether it's offline or online, but speak up for what is right. We also talk about the importance of praising elected officials, whether it's your city council, countywide, statewide officials, when they stand up for something that's right, when they stand up against hate, When they do something that's a sign of bipartisanship, praise them, even if they don't belong to the political party that you support. It's a great thing, and I know they would appreciate that as well, and it would encourage them to continue that, right? And then when if you do have the opportunity, try to host something locally. So one thing I forgot to mention earlier is a dining event that we've been working on this past 6 to 12 months is called Love Anyway Feast. And it's a true grassroots dining event where you can host it into your own home. And so we're going to continue growing those throughout this year. So there are opportunities for everyone on the call to participate and start having some of these conversations and realize, I mean, guys, even just a block party, that's not part of the top 50 things on that document, but something as simple as that. Reach out to you. Do you know your neighbor? Do I know my neighbor? Right? So simple things like that, and you'll realize that you have a lot in common with your neighbor, even though they may not have the same political sign in their yard. So.
I love that, Joe. And also, this fall, we launched a campaign called All We Share, where we were highlighting the fact that 99.9% of Americans don't choose violence. That is just a shared sentiment that is not what we want to see within our communities. And so, what that also causes me to think about as we're talking about building community and finding common ground, or just those ways that we can actually really see each other in such a positive light. Like, just like you're saying, Joe, hey, I might not agree with you, but there are some things that I can absolutely honor and say thank you for doing X, Y, and Z. I really appreciated that. I'm glad you did it. And I think that, one of the things that we need right now is to see each other's humanity, respect each other, highlighting those, the good that we see in each other and in our communities. And I love what you said, Joe, about a block party. Absolutely. Host a block party. That, to me, that's what, being in community and the goal of Love Anyway Feast and doing it at a grassroots level is all about. We actually saw last year a somebody that hosted a feast, a woman and her mother. They had a Love Anyway feast at their home, but they took the time to make flyers, and they passed it out to everybody on their block and the block over, and then to their friends. And they didn't know all the people, and some of the people were from different groups, different political affiliations, with their signs in their yard. This is during the election, so things are very, very tense, and they didn't know who was going to show up to their home. But they said, you know what? We're going to do it anyways. We want to be in community with people. We are tired of this division, and we want to see each other beyond these binaries. And so they were like very pleasantly surprised to see the people that showed up to their home and began sharing in space and community with them, neighbors they'd never met before. And they just didn't know who was going to come, but they opened up their doors and were hopeful. And I think that there's something so beautiful about that. Maxine, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about what does it look like to find common ground in such a divisive time, and the ways you might do that in the work that you're doing right now.
Gosh, I think Joe had such beautiful points that I'm struggling to think of anything um in addition, but I'll share, you know, so many people, as you both have alluded to, are looking for solutions. And it's one thing we talk about with our student journalists is focusing on, okay, well, here's the problem, and you want to acknowledge the problem and then go out and look for solutions. And a couple of weeks ago, we just had our final session for our spring 2025 cohort. And the solutions these students came up with from, wow, I'm in Florida, and something all Republicans, Democrats agree on is preserving our wetlands. Why is that? How is this an opportunity to build further bipartisan consensus on other issues that we're facing together? Other students talked about, how do I better understand the administration's time and manner policies and put forward for protests and put forward other solutions that I can see at other universities that could be a way for us to address this tension that we're experiencing on campus between free speech and protest. Other students put forward questions around how do I advance mental health solutions to violent crime as a way of navigating and preventing violent crime after a violent crime had happened within her community, within a family that she knew in her hometown. And how do I think more expansively and not just stew in the problem and really look for solutions, including outside my community? How do I look at what's happening in Texas, what's happening in North Carolina, as an opportunity to bring home for myself? And I think that's something journalists are obviously particularly well equipped to do. But it's something we all can do. I think I talked about overacting, underacting. When we're stuck in the paralysis and all we can see is the problem, there's always someone who has faced a similar problem before in another part of the world, in another part of the country. That's something I take so much inspiration from our colleagues around the world who are building peace in much more difficult situations than what we're facing in the United States. And if they can do it, why can't I?
I think that's a perfect segue as we're gonna begin, closing out this time. But I think that there's something that I really want to highlight, and I hope that you all heard it in what's been said so far, is that there's something that you can do, and nothing is too small. I think our examples, have gone from just reaching out to your neighbor, also to whether that's advocating with your elected officials, talking to people, starting a compact for your community where you're working with local businesses or even elected officials to get people to sign on to, hey, like we want to like uphold these values as a community together. And if you agree to this, please jump in, sign this. Let's embody this. It's not just about signing a piece of paper, but it's also just about making sure that we are actually living out the values that we say that we have. And one of the best parts about finding this community, finding this common ground, is that the results that yield from it are beautiful and they can change communities for decades. What I always like to say is there really is no action that's too small, because your one change for your life will potentially impact your family, your legacy. And that's a generation of people who will be impacted, and their lives will be changed because of the posture and the shift that you made. So those shifts are not on accident. They're not small. They're actually significant. And imagine if, you and somebody else and somebody else and somebody else made those changes, and then we begin to see that change in a lasting place for generations. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're finding yourself stressed, you're overwhelmed, a lot's happening, and even the news, all these things are stressing you out, I encourage you to turn off all the noise and to go out there and be in community. Have you reached out to a friend that you haven't talked to in a while? Is there somebody you haven't chatted with on the phone? Who are some people in your life that maybe you're close to, or maybe you're acquaintances with, that you need to reignite and spark conversations with? Have you talked to your grandparents? Have you talked to the people in your family in a while? Those people are wonderful and hold so much value and wisdom if you have that available to you. Really find yourself in community. And if you don't know where to start, you don't know where to go, there are all kind of different ways you can look up online these days of people that are hosting walking clubs or hiking groups, biking, all sorts of things that you can get involved in. And if you want to stay connected to us, you can find us on our website at cgusa.org. And we can drop our website in the chat. It's already there. But we really would love to stay connected to you. You can sign up for our email list. We, like you heard Joe say, there's going to be all kind of events happening in Texas and in the different states that we work in. So if you would like to stay connected to us, make sure that you go ahead and go to our website, find out more information so you can stay connected. And so we can make sure that you are aware of all the things that we're doing so you can come and hang out with us. And we just really appreciate you joining us tonight. And we hope that some of these tips are really going to help you go from conflict to community where you are right now. We will talk to you soon. And thank you so much for your time.